She ran from her toxic ex and took a job at a bar. Not knowing it belonged to a mafia boss, Avery Lane was 26 years old and running. Savannah was 600 miles behind her, a humid memory choked by exhaust fumes and the bitter, metallic relief of escape. She left with one rolling suitcase, the wheels vibrating nervously on the asphalt, and just enough cash folded into her bra to be dangerous. The engagement ring, the one that had felt more like a handcuff, was gone. Pawned for gas money in a town just north of the state line, the man who gave it to her, Caleb Royce, was the reason she was currently driving a car registered under a name she no longer used, Caleb, a Savannah patrolman who wore his badge like a shield and wielded it like a hammer. He loved control more than he ever loved her, and he used his job to guarantee it. The polite suggestions had become commands. The check-in texts had become GPS tracking on her car. The jealousy had become isolating her from friends. The last straw was when he'd put his hand on her throat during an argument, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to pin, his eyes flat and cold as he told her she needed to learn respect. Avery left 3 days later while he was on a double shift. She chose Baltimore. It was a city of brick and shadow, big enough to swallow a person whole. It was a port city, a constant churn of arrivals and departures, a crossroads for immigrants and transients, where anonymity was a form of currency. It was cold. The early November wind snapping off the Patapsco River, a harsh baptism that felt nothing like Georgia's sticky warmth. She found a room for rent by the week, paid in cash, above a small Dominican laundromat. The rhythmic thump of the dryers below her floorboards was a constant, mechanical heartbeat, and the smell of industrial bleach and fabric softener was her new air. Avery lived in the key of startle. The metallic slam of a truck's tailgate on the street below made her flinch, her heart leaping into her throat, her hand gripping the pepper spray on her key chain. She spent her first few days watching the street from behind her thin, yellowed curtains, cataloging every police cruiser that passed, waiting for the familiar profile of his unit, even though he was states away. He had promised her, his voice low and proprietary after she'd tried to break it off the first time. "I can find you in any state. Avery, a cops network is everywhere. You don't get to just leave me." She believed him. The sound of a distant siren didn't mean help. It meant him. Her only connection in this sprawling, indifferent city was Maribel Soto. They had known each other briefly years ago, a brief overlap in college before Maribel went to nursing school. Maribel, now a night shift nurse at Mercy, had a pragmatic, no-nonsense kindness. "You need work. Mija," Maribel had said over the phone, her voice tired but firm after Avery gave her the shortest possible version of the truth. "I know a place. It's high-end. The Meridian. It's on the water. The tips are insane. But the clientele is specific. I know one of the managers. I can get you a trial shift. Just look presentable." Presentable was a challenge when her entire wardrobe fit in one bag. Avery stood outside the address Maribel gave her in Fells Point, clutching the strap of her borrowed purse. The Meridian looked nothing like a bar. It was a slab of dark architecture pushed up against the waterfront, its facade matte black and imposing, looking more like a corporate fortress than a place for drinks. The windows were tinted so dark they reflected the gray sky and the agitated water like mirrors. 2 men in sharp, black, tailored suits stood flanking the entrance, their presence as solid and unwelcoming as the heavy oak doors. A line of gleaming black town cars and a lone Bentley idled at the curb, engines purring, drivers waiting patiently. This was not a place for cheap beer and jukeboxes. This was a place for power. Avery smoothed the front of the black sheath dress Maribel had lent her. It was simple, elegant, but standing here, Avery felt like a thrift store forgery. She felt cheap. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks with cold. She was down to her last $50. Desperation, she was learning, was a stronger force than inadequacy. She took a sharp breath, walked up the shallow steps, and approached the taller of the 2 security men. "Excuse me, I'm here for a trial shift. Maribel Soto sent me. My name is Avery Lane." The man did not smile. He was broad, his suit straining across his shoulders, and he simply looked at her, a long, assessing gaze that stripped her down to her worn-out shoes and the fear underneath. He nodded once, slowly. He touched his earpiece. Got the referral. Back alley. He pointed not to the imposing front doors, but to a narrow, gated alley to the side. Staff entrance. Someone will meet you. The alley was clean, but smelled of damp brick and the metallic tang of the nearby saltwater. The steel door was unmarked. As she reached for it, it opened, revealing another man in a suit, this one leaner, holding a tablet. Lane. She nodded. He stepped aside. The hallway beyond was a stark contrast to the gritty exterior. It was long, paneled in dark, polished mahogany, and lit by recessed lighting that glowed warmly. The carpet was thick, plush, and dark gray, silencing her footsteps completely. She counted at least 4 security cameras, their small black domes gleaming from the ceiling corners. The air was still and smelled overwhelmingly of 2 things: expensive wood polish and old money. At the end of the corridor was a small, empty waiting area outside a single, heavy door that looked more like a bank vault than an office. The man gestured to a leather chair. "Wait here. The boss wants to see you first." Avery's stomach tightened, the cheap coffee she'd had for breakfast turning sour. "The manager?" The man almost smirked, but caught himself. "Santino Vega. He's the boss. He decides everything here." That sentence, simple and direct, landed harder than any threat Caleb had ever made. It held an absolute, unquestionable finality. The sound of a police siren suddenly seemed trivial. A noise from a simpler world. This was a different kind of authority, one that didn't bother with sirens. Avery sat on the absolute edge of the chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She waited for perhaps 10 minutes, the silence broken only by the faint, deep thrum of bass music vibrating almost imperceptibly through the walls. Finally, the heavy door opened with a quiet, expensive-sounding click. The office beyond was dark, dominated by a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the misty, industrial harbor. The lights of the container cranes blinked in the distance like patient, mechanical beasts. A man stood silhouetted against the glass, not behind the massive mahogany desk, but leaning against the side of it, as if he owned the view itself. As she stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her, he turned. He was maybe in his early 30s, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit, no tie, the collar of his white shirt open, a sliver of intricate black tattoo peeked out from his cuff. He moved with a predator's economy of motion. Nothing wasted, but it was his voice that stopped her breath. It was deep, a gravelly baritone layered with the smooth, clipped edges of an English education and the faintly rolled consonants of Spanish heritage. "Miss Lane." He didn't ask, he stated. "The one who ran from Georgia." He gestured to the chair opposite the desk. "Sit down." He knew. In the space of one sentence, he told her he already knew. Avery sat, her spine rigid, her palms instantly damp. She understood immediately. This was not just a bar. This was not just a job. And the man watching her with eyes she couldn't quite read in the dim light was the kind of man that, once he truly saw you, you could never truly be lost again. Santino Vega did not move back behind the imposing desk. He stayed leaning against its polished edge, a position of casual, deliberate dominance. He was in his early 30s, the dark, custom-fit suit emphasizing the width of his shoulders and the lean taper of his waist. His black hair was meticulously styled, short on the sides, slightly longer on top. When he gestured again to the chair, the movement revealed the intricate lines of a black ink tattoo disappearing under his starched white cuff. His eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned her face, missing nothing. Avery felt pinned by that gaze, like a specimen under glass. "I don't like the desk keeping us so far apart," he said. His voice that unsettling blend of gravel and velvet, it was a statement of intimacy that felt like a threat. Avery sat, forcing her back to remain straight, her hands locked in her lap. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the scent of his cologne, something expensive, involving leather and spice and the lingering odor of the harbor fog outside. He watched her breathe. "You're scared," he observed. Not unkindly, just factually. "You've been scared for a while. It's settled into you." He pushed off the desk slightly, not moving closer, but shifting his weight. "Let's be clear. Miss Lane, the Meridian is a legitimate business. It is the flagship restaurant in the Vega Group portfolio. We own high-end establishments up and down the coast, a container shipping line that operates out of this port, and several other ventures that the local news finds less interesting." The way he said "other ventures" hung in the air, weighted and absolute. This was the confirmation. She wasn't applying for a bartending job. She was auditioning for a role in something much larger and much darker. "Maribel Soto speaks highly of your work ethic," he continued, his tone conversational, but his eyes were sharp. "But my people ran your information when she submitted your name this morning. You are a ghost. You were an administrative assistant at a logistics firm in Savannah for 3 years. Good reviews. Stable. Then, 4 days ago, you quit without notice. Your phone number was disconnected. Your apartment lease was broken, incurring a significant penalty. You left no forwarding address. You paid cash for your room above the laundromat." The sheer speed of his information retrieval chilled Avery more than the alley wind had in just a few hours. He had painted a perfect portrait of her escape. "So, why?" he asked, the question soft but inflexible. "Why the sudden disappearance? Why Baltimore? Why my bar?" Avery's throat was dry. She thought of Caleb, of the GPS tracker she'd found velcroed under the passenger seat, of the obsessive texts, of the cold grip on her neck. She couldn't say that. To say she was running from a cop was to invite disaster. But to lie to this man seemed like an even greater folly. He would know. She chose the half-truth, the one that tasted real enough. "I needed a new place," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The situation I was in, it was time to leave. I had to get out. I needed a clean start where no one knew me. I can work. I learn fast. I don't cause trouble. And I keep my mouth shut. Maribel said you pay well, and I am out of money." Santino studied her, his gaze unwavering. He seemed to be listening to the words she was not saying. He saw the panic she tried to hide behind her makeup, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the door when she finished speaking. He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking to dig into your personal affairs, Miss Lane," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "I'm asking because I need to know if someone is going to follow you here. I need to know if you are going to bring trouble to my door." "No," Avery said, perhaps too quickly. "He doesn't know where I am. No one does. He, with the resources to make you abandon your entire life." Santino filed this information away. "He won't be a problem. He won't find me," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. "Good." Santino made his decision. "The job is yours. Trial basis. You'll start tonight. Training with Grace, my bar manager. The pay Maribel quoted you is correct, plus tips. Tips are paid out nightly, in cash." Relief washed over Avery, so potent it almost made her dizzy, but it was short-lived. "There are conditions," he added, and the boardroom chill returned. 1. You do not speak about our clientele, ever. You will see important people here, politicians, judges, businessmen. You are invisible. You hear nothing, you see nothing. He held up a second finger. 2. You do not discuss the internal structure of this organization, who works here, what they do, when they arrive. It is not your concern. His expression hardened. 3. You do not socialize with law enforcement. We maintain a professional distance from the BPD. We do not want misunderstandings. You have a problem. You don't call 911. You call Grace. Grace calls me. He paused, letting that sink in. And finally, there is a specialized local agency, the Citywide Investigations Division for Harbor Affairs, the CIDH. They are persistent. If anyone approaching you identifies themselves as CIDH or asks questions about our shipping manifests, you stop the conversation, you walk away, and you report it to me immediately. Understood. Avery just nodded. her head swimming. CIDH, shipping manifests. This was far beyond mixing cocktails. Good, go find Grace. She'll get you a uniform. He turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. Avery left the office, her legs shaky. Grace. A tall woman with sharp eyes and reddish blonde hair pulled into a severe bun was waiting. She handed Avery a tightly folded uniform, a black, form-fitting, tactical fabric dress, and a temporary key card. Avery walked to the staff locker room, the thick carpet swallowing her steps. She had the job. She had money. She had security. But as she changed, she felt the unmistakable sensation of a lock clicking shut. She had just stepped out of Caleb's cage and straight into a much larger, wealthier, chrome-plated one. That night, the main floor of the Meridian was electric. It was a sea of dark suits, expensive perfume, and the low murmur of powerful conversations. From his private balcony on the second floor, Santino Vega watched the floor. His gaze bypassed the politicians and the shipping magnates, settling instead on the new girl. He watched Avery Lane through the smoked glass partition. And on the high-definition security monitor in his adjacent private lounge. She was good. She was nervous, but she channeled it into efficiency. She didn't fawn over the guests. She didn't try to make eye contact. She just served. She kept her movements precise, anticipated orders, and blended into the background. She was exactly what he'd hired her to be. His bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Rocco, stood silently by the door. "She's running from someone," Santino said quietly, his eyes still on the monitor, watching Avery deftly handle a difficult order from a drunk shipping heir. "The cop ex-fiancé," Rocco stated. His team had pulled the full file. "She didn't mention he was a cop," Santino noted. "Smart. She knows we don't like them, but she's terrified. You see the way she looks at the door every time it opens?" Rocco nodded. "Keep an eye on the street," Santino ordered. "Have the night valet team log any cars that park for more than 20 minutes. I don't like coincidences." Rocco tapped his earpiece and relayed the order. Santino took a sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. Outside, 3 blocks down. The street was dark, smelling of low tide and diesel, a nondescript gray sedan, a standard-issue model favored by municipal employees, was parked in the shadows. It had been sitting there for nearly 2 hours, engine cold. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel, a high-powered digital camera with a telephoto lens resting on the passenger seat. He zoomed in on the front entrance of the Meridian, capturing the faces of the valets, the security, and the clientele. He lowered the camera and picked up his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Found her," he said, his voice tight with a possessive, righteous anger. "She's in Baltimore, working at some high-end bar on the waterfront, the Meridian. Yeah, she's stupid enough to use her real name." Grace Monroe ran the VIP section of the Meridian with the quiet, intimidating efficiency of a chief of staff. She was the bar manager, a tall, severe woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. On Avery's third night, after deciding Avery wasn't a complete liability, Grace escorted her up the glass-walled staircase to the mezzanine. "This is not the main floor. Lane," Grace said, her voice low and crisp, never rising above the ambient thrum of the music. "Down there. They're drinking to be seen. Up here. They're drinking to do business. The tips are higher and the tolerance for mistakes is 0. The VIP lounge was a world unto itself. The lighting was dimmer. The chairs were upholstered in deep, black leather, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. The clients were different. They spoke in hushed, serious tones, and their suits were clearly bespoke. "You don't approach. You wait to be summoned," Grace instructed, her eyes sweeping the room. "You remember their drink, their name, and their preference for ice. We have partners in here. Transport partners, logistics associates of Mr. Vega. You are invisible. You hear nothing. You see nothing. Understood?" "Understood," Avery affirmed. Avery. It turned out, was built for this. Her previous job had required a meticulous memory for shipping codes and client preferences. This was no different. She memorized the face of a man who drank only Macallan 25, neat, and the name of another who preferred his martinis with a specific brand of artisanal olive. She learned to move silently on the thick carpet, to refill a water glass without interrupting a conversation, to anticipate a request before it was made. Grace watched her with a mixture of impressed approval and distinct wariness. Avery was too good, too quickly. She was professional, detached, and utterly blank. She didn't flirt, she didn't flatter, she just served, and Santino Vega watched. Avery felt his gaze like a physical weight from the private balcony above the lounge, the one that connected directly to his office. She would look up, just for a second, and meet his eyes through the smoked glass. It wasn't the predatory leer she was used to from men in bars. It was something else. It was an assessing, calculating gaze. He was measuring her, trying to solve an equation. It was the look of a man determining the value of a new acquisition, and it unsettled her far more than simple lust would have. The precarious balance she had found was shattered halfway through the shift. She had ducked into a service alcove to polish glasses when her burner phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She checked it, her back to the room. It was a text from Maribel. Avery. Trouble. Caleb came by your parents' house. In his uniform, Avery's blood turned to ice. She gripped the phone, her knuckles white. He told them you were unstable and he was just worried sick. He was asking questions. Then he went to my mother's house. He knows we're friends. Avery. He's actively hunting you. The final text made her stomach clench in absolute terror. He's using his police network. He's running checks on new rental agreements and employment records in major cities. He knows you're in a new state. Please, be careful. I have to delete this conversation. He was using the badge. He was systematically, officially, hunting her. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. He'll find me. He'll find the job application. He'll find this bar. She forced herself to walk back onto the floor. Her composure stretched thin as glass. A group of Spanish clients in a dark booth signaled for another bottle. They were loud, laughing, and clearly celebrating. Avery retrieved the expensive champagne, her hands moving on autopilot, but as she poured the sparkling wine into the tall flutes, her hand began to tremble. It was almost imperceptible, just a slight, vibrating tremor, but it caused the neck of the bottle to tap faintly against the crystal rim. One of the men looked at her hand, then up at her face, his smile fading. "My apologies," Avery murmured, steadying her grip. She finished the pour and retreated, her face burning with humiliation and fear. As she turned, she instinctively looked up. Santino Vega was standing on the balcony, perfectly still, his dark eyes locked directly on her. He had seen the fear she tried so hard to hide. The rest of the night was a blur of agonizing tension. At 2 a.m., when the last of the VIPs had finally departed, Grace gave her a curt nod. "Good recovery on table 7, you're efficient, see you tomorrow." Avery felt a wave of hollow relief. She just wanted her small room, her flimsy lock. She was heading toward the staff exit when Rocco, Santino's monolithic bodyguard, stepped into her path. "Mister, Vega wants to see you, now." The dread returned, cold and immediate. She was being fired. The shaking hand was a liability he would not tolerate. She walked the long, silent corridor back to his office. The door was open. He was seated behind his massive desk, not leaning against it. He was looking at a large monitor displaying high-definition images. "Close the door," he said. She did, the sound of the latch clicking echoing in the quiet room. He swiveled the monitor to face her. It was a mosaic of security footage, a gray, unmarked sedan, parked 3 blocks down, captured from an exterior camera, time-stamped the previous night. He clicked, the same car, same spot, from tonight. He clicked again, a zoomed-in, grainy but clear shot of the man behind the wheel, illuminated by his phone. Caleb. "This vehicle has been stationed within eyeshot of my front door for 2 consecutive nights," Santino said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He's not a customer. He's on surveillance. He yours." There was no point in lying. This man had cameras on streets 3 blocks away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice tight. "Who is he?" Avery took a breath. "His name is Caleb Royce. We were engaged." And, Santino prompted, his eyes unblinking. He already knew. He just wanted her to say it. He's a police officer, Avery said, the words tasting like ash. Savannah PD. She braced for the explosion. She had brought a cop to his door. In this world, there was no greater sin. It meant investigations, raids, seizures. Santino did not raise his voice. He didn't move. He simply stared at her, the silence stretching out, heavier and more terrifying than any shouting could have been. Finally, he leaned forward and pressed a button on his desk console. Rocco, get me the head of Waterfront Control on the line. I want a full shadow team on a gray sedan. Georgia plates, and I want a digital blackout on all local inquiries regarding the Meridian, effective immediately. He released the button and looked back at Avery. He's not angry, Santino observed, as if diagnosing a problem. He's methodical. He thinks you are property he's misplaced. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. He was close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne. I don't like people touching my staff. Avery, he said, his voice dropping to that low, proprietary rumble that vibrated through her. When you work here, when you're under my roof, you belong to this house. This house protects its assets. He paused, letting the implication sink in. He's no longer your problem. He is mine. The words should have been comforting, but they landed like a cold, heavy chain. You belong to this house. It was the same promise of protection Caleb had always used, just backed by infinitely more power. You're dismissed. Go home. Avery fled, her footsteps silenced by the plush carpet. She burst out into the damp, cold night air, her heart hammering. She took a cab back to the laundromat, Santino's words echoing in her head. She climbed the dark, creaking stairs to her apartment, digging in her pocket for her key. She slid it into the lock. It didn't fit. Confused, she tried again. The key wouldn't turn. It felt wrong. She pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight and aiming it at the doorknob. Her blood ran cold. The cheap brass around the keyhole was mangled. It was covered in fresh, deep scratches, the metal gouged and warped as if someone had jammed a screwdriver or a lock-picking tool into it with brutal, impatient force. He had been here. Caleb had found her. He had been right outside her door. Avery didn't scream. She didn't even try the door. She knew, with chilling certainty, that he wasn't inside. This wasn't an entry, it was a message. I can get to you. There is no lock you can hide behind. She backed away, her suitcase still in her hand from when she'd left for work that morning, having planned to deposit her first night's tips. She turned and ran down the stairs, hitting the pavement and hailing the first cab she saw. She couldn't go to Maribel's. Caleb knew about Maribel. There was only one place in the entire city of Baltimore that was safer and more dangerous than the room she had just abandoned. She climbed into the back of the cab, her whole body shaking. The Meridian, she told the driver, her voice a hoarse whisper. Back to the harbor. She spent the remainder of the night huddled on a vinyl sofa in the female staff locker room, her single suitcase pressed firmly against the locked door. The first light of dawn was a weak, gray smear against the high windows of the staff locker room. Avery hadn't slept. Remaining rigid on the vinyl sofa, her suitcase a useless barricade against the door. The adrenaline of the night had curdled into a cold, trembling exhaustion. She was found at 6:30 in the morning by a cleaner, who simply stared, backed out, and made a call. 15 minutes later, the door opened, not with a bang, but with a quiet, authoritative click. Santino Vega stood there, dressed not in a suit, but in dark slacks and a gray Henley that fit snugly across his shoulders. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but unlike her, he seemed to draw power from the darkness. His eyes took in the scene in one swift glancer, pale and disheveled, the suitcase, the terror that had settled back into her features. He didn't make a fuss. He didn't ask questions. He simply stated a fact. Your home is compromised. Staying there again is foolish. Avery flinched, pulling her borrowed dress tighter around her. I didn't know where else to go. You came to the right place. He jerked his head. Get your bag. You're moving. He led her not out to the street, but to a private elevator she hadn't known existed, tucked behind a paneled wall in the main corridor. He used a key, then a code. The elevator rose smoothly, opening not into a bar or an office, but into a private apartment. It was not the opulent, glass-walled penthouse of a movie villain. The space was masculine, functional, and secure. The walls were paneled in dark, warm wood. The furniture was heavy, leather, and practical. One entire wall was a bank of security monitor screens, currently showing silent, multi-angled views of the bar, the entrance, the alley, and the docks. A small, high-end kitchenette was built into one corner. "This is the safe house," he said, dropping her bag by the door. "It's on the top floor, above my office. The elevator is the only way in, and it only responds to my key card. No one comes up here. Not Grace, not Rocco, unless I personally clear them." He walked over to a narrow, reinforced door she hadn't noticed. He opened it. Inside was a small, soundproofed room that was unmistakably a private, indoor shooting range, targets clipped at the far end. He closed the door. "You'll stay here." "Here with you." Avery's voice was thin. "This isn't my residence," he clarified, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "This is a utility. This is where I go when things are complicated. You are complicated." As if on cue, his personal phone buzzed on his hip. He pulled it out, his expression darkening as he read the text. He turned away from her, walking to the massive window that overlooked the harbor. The same view as his office, just higher. "What?" He snapped into the phone. He listened, his back rigid. "A patrolman from Georgia. You're certain?" He was silent for a long moment. "He's using the Interstate Violent Offender Task Line. That's a federal warrant list." Avery's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb. He was using federal resources. "He's pinging Latino-owned businesses," Santino said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, cold growl. "He's not looking for a criminal. He's looking for her. He thinks she's with a gang." He clenched his free fist. "This, Mosca Muerta. This little fly is tapping on my network with his badge, trying to see what rattles. Shut it down. I want every query he makes to bounce back as error and find out who in the federal system is approving his requests. I want a name." He hung up without saying goodbye. He stood staring out at the gray water, his jaw working. Avery could feel the anger radiating off him. It was a cold, controlled fury, not the hot, impulsive rage she knew from Caleb, and it was infinitely more frightening. "He's using his job," she whispered, stating the obvious. "He's using his job to poke a bear." "Avery," Santino corrected, turning to face her. "And he's about to find out the bear doesn't like to be poked." He glanced at his watch. "I have business tonight. A sensitive shipment is arriving. I have to oversee it personally now that I know federal eyes are sniffing around, even if they're sniffing for the wrong reasons." He started to walk out, then paused. He looked at her, truly looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "There's food in the fridge. The shower is stocked. Get some rest. You're safe here." He left. Avery was alone in the silent, secure room, surrounded by the quiet hum of electronics and the distant cry of seagulls. She showered, the hot water washing away some of the grime, but none of the fear. She found a plain black t-shirt and sweats in a drawer, clearly left for guests, and put them on. She couldn't rest. Hours later, deep into the night, the apartment door opened, Santino entered, and Avery's breath caught. He was in the process of buttoning a dark linen shirt. Underneath it, stark and black, was a low-profile ballistic vest, strapped tightly to his chest. The sight of it made his work horrifyingly real. This was not a restaurateur. This was not just a man who owned a shipping line. This was a man who went to business meetings, expecting to be shot. He saw her staring at the vest. He didn't bother to explain. He just finished the buttons, concealing the armor, but the lethal reality of it now hung between them. He walked to the kitchenette, opened a drawer, and took out a compact, black stun gun. He placed it on the granite countertop, sliding it toward her. "I make my living off stupid men," he said, his voice flat, echoing his earlier sentiment. If your ex is smart, he won't come up here. He'll understand what this building is, and he'll stay away. But I've learned not to rely on the intelligence of obsessive men." He tapped the stun gun. "This is for your peace of mind, not mine. No one is getting through that elevator, but you should feel safe." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "Don't leave this room, for any reason." He left. Avery walked to the counter, her fingers brushing the cold plastic of the weapon. She turned to the wall of monitors. They were active. She saw the dark, wind-swept docks, illuminated by the harsh white lights of the cranes. She saw Santino's men, dark figures moving with purpose. She watched for an hour, then she saw it, a low, sleek boat, running with no lights, sliding into a dark slip. Far earlier than the scheduled container ship, a van pulled up to meet it. But as the boat's occupants began to move, another group of men, at least 6 of them, emerged from behind a stack of containers. They were armed. It was an ambush, a hijack. Avery's heart hammered. She scanned the screens, her eyes frantically searching for Santino. She saw him. He wasn't hidden. He was standing in the open, flanked by Rocco, between his men and the hijackers. A high-definition, long-range camera zoomed in, and the image was terrifyingly clear. A hot mic from the security feed crackled to life, filling the silent apartment with the sounds of the docks, the wind, the water, and Santino's voice, amplified and perfectly calm. "You're early, gentlemen," he called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "And you're in the wrong slip. This cargo isn't for you. We'll take it, Vega." A voice shouted back. "No," Santino said, as if correcting a child. "You won't. My men on the crane have a .50 caliber aimed at your engine block. My men on the roof have you in their sights. You have 2 options. You turn around and leave, and we forget this happened, or you try, and you never leave the harbor." Avery stared, mesmerized. He was in the middle of a gunfight, and he was negotiating. He was in complete, absolute control. She found her hand had unconsciously closed around the grip of the stun gun. She was holding it. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was terrified for him. It was a new, twisting, protective instinct that shocked her. For the first time, she wanted the dangerous man to live, not because he was her new jailer, but because she just wanted him to. After a tense, silent standoff, the rival crew slowly, angrily, lowered their weapons and retreated to their boat. Santino watched them go, unmoving. It was another hour before the elevator doors slid open. Santino returned. His hair was damp and wind-tossed from the sea spray. His shirt was unbuttoned again, and he smelled of the cold, metallic night air and the faint, sharp tang of gunpowder. He was unstrapping the vest as he walked in, his face hard with exhaustion and adrenaline. He stopped dead when he saw her. She was standing by the monitors, still awake, her face pale, her knuckles white from where she'd been gripping the counter. He saw the stun gun resting beside her. His entire expression changed. The hardness evaporated. The cold calculation in his eyes receded. And something else, something softer and deeper, took its place. He looked tired and human. He walked over, stopping a few feet from her. He looked at her, then at the monitor, then back at her. "You've been dealing with Caleb alone for too long," he said, his voice rough. "From now on, we split it." Avery looked at him, at the man who wore armor to work and faced down armed men on dark docks. Caleb's protection had been about control, about locking her in. Santino's was about neutralizing the threat. It wasn't a cage, it was a shield. And it felt dangerously, terrifyingly different. The safe house was silent, but the air was still electric, humming with the adrenaline of the dockside standoff. Avery was still in the black t-shirt and sweats Santino had provided, her hair a tangled knot, her eyes wide and fixed on the monitors, which now showed only the dark, quiet water. The confrontation was over, but the tension remained. Trapped in the room with them, Santino had shed the ballistic vest, tossing it onto a leather chair with a heavy, definitive thud. He moved to the kitchenette, his steps measured, and opened a cabinet, pulling out a small first aid kit. He was dabbing at his upper arm with a bar towel. "It's just a graze," he said, his voice rough. "One of them was faster than I expected." Avery saw the dark, angry red line just below his shoulder, a shallow groove where a bullet had kissed the skin. It was bleeding sluggishly. He pulled out an antiseptic wipe, his movements precise, but she found herself stepping forward before she had even formed the thought. "Let me," she whispered. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet. He stopped, his dark eyes meeting hers. He didn't argue. He just held his arm out, standing perfectly still, watching her. The proximity was sudden, intimate and suffocating. She took the wipe, her fingers brushing his. His skin was hot. As she cleaned the graze, she was overwhelmingly aware of him, the heat radiating from his body, the sharp, masculine scent of his skin mixed with gunpowder and the cold metallic tang of the harbor air. It made her head swim. He didn't watch his arm. He watched her face. His gaze was intense, analytical, as if he were memorizing the lines of her jaw, the fear still lingering in her eyes. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question. Avery flinched, her hand faltering. His voice dropped, becoming very soft, almost gentle, but with an edge of cold steel. "Did he ever choke you?" The question was a blade, sliding between her ribs, precise and agonizingly accurate. It struck the very center of her shame. Her breath caught, her throat tightening until it burned. A single hot tear she hadn't known was coming escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She couldn't move. She could only nod, a tiny, jerky motion. "He said," she managed, her voice a fractured whisper. "He said he was teaching me respect." A muscle jumped in Santino's jaw. His eyes went dark, the flicker of anger there so cold it was almost black. He didn't curse. He didn't promise to kill Caleb. He did something far more potent. Very slowly, with deliberate, measured grace, he raised his free hand. He held it up in the space between them, palm open, his fingers relaxed. He let her see it. It was clean, warm and steady. He didn't move it toward her, but simply offered it for inspection. "If I touch you, Avery," he said, his voice a low, dark vow that vibrated through her, "it is for you to choose. It is never, ever to teach." That was it. The absolute, unassailable difference. Caleb, the man of the law, had always taken, always controlled, his touch a prelude to a command. Santino, the man who lived outside the law, was offering. He was giving her the one thing Caleb had systematically destroyed: a choice, a surge of something hot, sharp, and entirely unfamiliar want cut through the fear. It was a purely selfish desire, a need to feel something other than terror. She finished placing the bandage, her fingers lingering for a half second on the warmth of his skin. Then she made her choice. She leaned in, closing the last few inches. She rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The reaction was instantaneous, a concussive shock. It was not a gentle or exploratory kiss. It was an explosion, born of adrenaline, survival, and a month of pent-up terror. It was desperate, deep, and famished. His mouth was firm, answering her urgency with a controlled, possessive heat. His hands, which had remained at his sides, came up, but they didn't go to her throat, not to her face. One hand splayed wide across the small of her back, the other gripped her hip, and he pulled her flush against his hard body. He didn't lock her in. He anchored her, guiding her into the kiss. Avery moaned, a sound that was torn from her, a sound of pure surrender not to him, but to her own need. Her hands fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, needing the fabric gone, needing to feel the man beneath. He let her, his mouth moving from hers to her jaw, his breathing ragged. She pushed the shirt open, pressing her palms flat against the solid, warm muscle of his chest. Beneath her hands, she felt the heavy, steady, powerful thump-thump of his heart. It was the most real and grounding sensation she had felt since she'd left Savannah. He guided her backward, his lips never leaving her skin, kissing the sensitive column of her neck. The backs of her knees hit the long, dark leather sofa. He didn't push. He didn't force. He waited, his hands still on her back and hip, his thumbs rubbing slow circles, giving her the space to retreat. She sat, pulling him down with her, pulling his mouth back to hers. The kiss deepened, tasting of survival. The room filled with the sound of sharp breaths, the soft friction of clothing on leather, the low murmur of his voice against her skin. He whispered something, a rough mix of English and Spanish, words she didn't fully understand but whose meaning was unmistakable in his touch. Querida, my darling, mine. The city lights of the harbor glittered through the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. The lights reflected in the bank of dark. Silent security monitors, silent witnesses as the apartment, and the man who ruled it. Finally, completely, blocked out the dangerous world below. Much later, Avery lay on the sofa, tangled in a sheet Santino had pulled from a closet. He was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, one arm draped heavily, protectively over her waist. She, however, was wide awake, staring at the glittering skyline. She was processing a revelation. Lying next to Caleb, even in the early, good days had always felt conditional. She was always coiled, braced, her muscles tight, waiting for the criticism, the correction, the next test she had to pass, lying here, in the fortress of a man infinitely more dangerous than her ex-fiancé. She felt boneless. The knots in her shoulders had dissolved. The tightness in her chest was gone. She felt utterly, paradoxically, safe. She felt like she could finally expand, take up space, and breathe. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in over a year, she truly slept. Santino was not as asleep as he seemed. He opened his eyes, the city lights reflecting in their dark depths, and looked at the woman who had curled into his side as if she belonged there. He had seen her fear. He had seen her efficiency, and now he had seen her absolute vulnerability. He looked at the gentle curve of her back, the way her breathing had finally evened out. He glanced at the end table, where his sidearm lay, its black steel gleaming dully, always within reach. He knew, with cold certainty, that this was no longer about a compromised employee or a business annoyance. Caleb Royce was no longer just her problem. He was Santino's, and Santino always took care of his problems. Downstairs, in the pre-dawn quiet, Grace Monroe was closing out the registers. She glanced at the security panel, the indicator light for the top-floor safe house. The one that was almost never used was still illuminated. It had been on all night. Grace sighed, a small, weary sound, and signed the final slip. The boss, who never, ever mixed his personal life with his operations, had just chosen the runaway. Avery woke up to the smell of strong coffee and the quiet, rhythmic tapping of fingers on a keyboard. The morning light was bright, streaming in through the massive window and illuminating the safe house. For a disorienting second, she felt warm and safe, tangled in the sheet on the leather sofa. Then the memories of the night before the graze, the kiss, the confession rushed in, followed immediately by the cold, hard reality of the monitors, which were still silently watching the harbor. Santino was at the desk, already dressed in a fresh, dark suit, his back to her. He was the picture of command, as if the raw, desperate intimacy of the previous night had never happened. "There's coffee," he said, without turning around. "And a file you need to see?" Avery pulled the sheet around herself, her skin suddenly cold. She sat up, her hair a mess, her borrowed sweats rumpled. She felt exposed, a stark contrast to his armored composure. She poured a coffee, her hands shaking slightly, and walked to the desk. A thick manila folder sat on the polished wood. Her name was not on it. Caleb's was. "I have a man in Atlanta," Santino said, his voice all business. "An information broker. I paid him to find out why a Savannah patrolman was so desperate that he'd start pinging federal databases." Avery opened the folder. The first page was an internal affairs memo, flagged for confidential review. Her heart stopped. Caleb wasn't just a jealous ex. He was a cop being actively investigated by his own department for repeated, unauthorized use of law enforcement databases and tracking equipment for personal matters. There were at least 2 other complaints from women before her. He's not just obsessed, she whispered, her stomach twisting. He's a predator. He's been doing this for... It gets worse, Santino said. He turned in his chair to face her, his expression grim. He's not just using his network, he's trying to build a new one. He pointed to the second document, a series of encrypted text messages his broker had intercepted. They were between Caleb and a contact listed under FMS. Federal Maritime Integrity Service, Santino translated, his voice laced with contempt. It sounds official. It's also completely fictitious. There is no such agency. Then who is he talking to? It's a shell designation as a front for a rival crew out of Philadelphia. A very new, very ambitious crew that has been trying to get a foothold in this harbor for 6 months. They've been looking for a weakness in my organization, a way in. Avery read the messages, and the full, sickening scope of the situation crashed down on her. Caleb was offering an internal source at a high-value Vega Group asset. He was offering her. He was trading her location, her employment, her name, to a criminal organization in exchange for their help in apprehending a major organized crime figure. My God, Avery breathed, sinking into the chair opposite him. He's not just trying to find me. He's selling me. He's trying to use me as a bargaining chip to get a promotion or to get you arrested. He's setting me up to take the fall. She felt a new, colder fear. She wasn't just running from an ex. She was a pawn in a war between two mafia organizations. She had run from a small, petty cage straight into a war zone. She looked at Santino, a cold dread settling in her gut. You knew, she said, her voice flat. You knew he was a cop. He didn't flinch. Yes. When I first told you about him the night he tried to break into my room, the first night, Santino said, his voice quiet. When Maribel submitted your name, my team ran your file. His name was attached as your emergency contact and fiancé. We ran him, too. We knew he was Savannah PD before you even walked into this office. The coffee turned to acid in her stomach. The warmth of the previous night, the feeling of safety, of being protected, all of it evaporated. It was replaced by a familiar, icy sting of betrayal. You knew, she repeated, her voice rising, shaking. You knew he was a cop. You knew I was lying, and you let me. You sat there and watched me, knowing everything. You held back information. You're just like him. She stood up, pulling the sheet around her like armor. I can't do this. I can't be here. I'm leaving. No, you're not, Santino said. It wasn't a shout. It was a simple, non-negotiable fact. You can't keep me here, she cried. That's what he did. He locked me in. He controlled me. And you're doing the same thing. Just with a better view and more expensive locks, I'm going back to my apartment. You don't have an apartment, why? He retorted, his patience finally snapping. It's compromised. He's not the only one who knows you're there. This other crew now knows where you live. Going back there isn't an act of freedom. Avery, it's suicide. He stood, but he didn't move toward her. He kept the desk between them, a silent acknowledgement of the line she had drawn. I am not Caleb, he said, his voice low and intense. He hid things to control you. I held that one piece of information back because you were terrified, and I didn't want to make it worse until I had a solution. I made a mistake, but I am not him. I need to leave, as she insisted, her voice breaking. I need to be on my own. I can't be your asset, your prisoner. You are not a prisoner, he said. He sighed. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, the commander was gone, replaced by a tired, frustrated man. But you are also not going to walk out that door and get yourself killed. There is a compromise. He paused, clearly thinking. The Vega Group maintains a guest house on Fleet Street. It's a high-end, discreet residence for visiting partners. It's not my home. It's not this safe house. But it has a 24-hour security detail, a concealed entrance, and it's impenetrable. You will go there. You will be safe, and you will not be with me. You will have your own space. Avery stared at him, her mind racing. It was another cage, but he was offering her a choice, a different one. It wasn't stay here with me. It was stay safe, but not here. It was an acknowledgement of her panic. "Fine," she said, her voice small but firm. "The guest house, but on one condition." His eyes narrowed. "No more secrets," she said. "I'm in this port war. I'm the bait. I have a right to know what's coming. You don't get to clear a path and then inform me of it. You tell me first. We decide. Together." Santino studied her for a long, silent moment. She was terrified, sleep-deprived, and wearing his t-shirt, and she was negotiating with him. A flicker of something respect. Admiration passed through his eyes. "Agreed," he said simply. "I'll have Rocco arrange the transfer." As if summoned, his desk console buzzed. He pressed the speaker. "What?" It was Rocco's voice, gravelly and urgent. "Boss, we have a problem. That breach we suspected. It's confirmed. The shipping schedule for the next 2 weeks just leaked. The manifest for the Andalusia. It's in the wind. That fake federal crew, they have it." Santino's face went absolutely cold. He looked at Avery, then at the monitors. The Andalusia was his biggest ship, carrying his most sensitive, high-value cargo. And the contracts for that cargo, the ones that legitimized it, were all signed here, at the Meridian. He finally understood. Caleb hadn't just sold out his ex-girlfriend. He had given Santino's rival the keys to the entire kingdom. Santino looked at Avery, the new sharp line of her jaw, the defiant fear in her eyes. His desire to keep her safe was now in direct, violent conflict with his need to protect his entire operation. To stop this, to catch this rival crew, he had to let them think their plan was working. He had to let them come for the source of their information. He had to use her as bait, the one thing he hated most. Rocco moved Avery to the Fleet Street guest house under the cover of a pre-dawn delivery. The residence was an anonymous, elegant brick townhouse, indistinguishable from the others on the historic street. Inside, however, it was a fortress, complete with discreet security cameras, reinforced doors, and a silent, professional security team in the basement. It was private, safe, and utterly sterile. Santino arrived 3 hours later. He found her in the small, walled garden, nursing a coffee. He held no files, no laptop. He was adhering to her rule. "They're coming for you," he said, skipping any pleasantry. "They have the Andalusia manifest, which they know is valuable, but they don't know who in my organization is feeding them information. Caleb has presented you as his internal source, the one he supposedly flipped. They will want to secure their asset, or they'll want to use you as leverage against me. Either way, they're coming." He laid out the plan. It was simple, and it was terrifying. "You will go to work tonight. You will take your normal shift in the VIP section. It's the last thing they'll expect. It shows them that I am ignorant, that I suspect nothing, and that you are still vulnerable." "And you?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I will be in the safe house, which is now a command center. My tech team has overridden the building system. I will have a live microphone feed and a dedicated camera on every angle of your station. You will not be alone. The second they identify themselves, the second you are in any danger, my team will move. But we need them to show their faces. Avery, we need them to approach you on my territory." Avery stared at the brick wall, at the ivy climbing toward the sun. She thought of the laundromat, of the scratched lock, of the feeling of absolute stomach-dropping helplessness. "I'm done running," she said, her voice quiet but hard. "I'm tired of being the prey. If I have to be the bait, I want to hold a knife." A flicker of dark approval crossed his face. "Good. Because the gym here is better than the one in the safe house." For the next 2 hours, he trained her. The guest house gym was pristine, smelling of clean rubber and steel. There was no intimacy in it, only brutal efficiency. He was not teaching her to fight. He was teaching her to maim just long enough to escape. "They won't fight fair," he said, his voice flat and instructional as he circled her on the mat. "They will grab you. They will expect you to panic." He suddenly shot his hand out and grabbed her wrist, his grip like a steel manacle. It was Caleb's exact move. Avery flinched, her breath catching in a gasp of pure muscle memory. "Your instinct is to pull away," he commanded, his voice close to her ear. Don't. You'll lose. His grip is his weakness. Use your other hand, not the fist, the thumb. Right here. He guided her hand. The joint. Break it. He showed her how to use her body weight to drive a knee into a vulnerable spot, how to twist a wrist to shatter it, how to use her fingernails as a weapon not against the face, but the eyes. His touch was firm, impersonal, instructional. He was a general arming a soldier, but his eyes were not the eyes of a general. As he showed her how to break a hold, his gaze lingered on her face, on her mouth, with that same dark, possessive intensity from the safe house. It was a look that promised to destroy anyone who made or used these techniques. At noon, he called a halt. They were both sweating, the air thick with tension. "We eat," he said. He took her not to a high-end restaurant, but to a loud, chaotic, open-air crab shack on the docks, a place smelling of steamed seafood and old beer. They sat at a wooden picnic table, surrounded by longshoremen and tourists, and for an hour, they were just a man and a woman. It was the first normal thing she had done in months. He talked. He met his side of their bargain. "My mother was from Mayagüez," he said, picking at a steamed shrimp. "She ran a small diner, right in the middle of Little Italy. She used to say the only thing more stubborn than a Sicilian was a Puerto Rican woman with a wooden spoon." He smiled, a small, rare expression that transformed his face. "She taught me how to cook. My father, he was just a longshoreman, the Vega Group, this empire. It wasn't from him. It was from my uncle. I inherited it when I was 25. It wasn't a gift. It was a requirement." He explained the politics of the water, of the Harbor Security Coalition, a polite name for the old guard council of families that kept the peace, kept the cargo moving, and, most importantly, kept the federal government from looking too closely. "This fake FMS crew," he said, his voice lowering. "The ones Caleb is working with, they're new. They don't respect the rules. They're trying to muscle in, and they think Caleb has given them the key. They think you are the key." Avery listened, finally understanding. This wasn't just about her. She was a spark, and Caleb was trying to use her to ignite a war. That night, Avery walked onto the floor of the Meridian. She was the picture of calm professionalism. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her uniform was immaculate. She had applied a slash of defiant, dark red lipstick. No one would ever guess she was a human snare. The night dragged, every order, every glass of whiskey. Every polite smile was a performance. Her nerves were stretched so thin they vibrated. Then, at 11:45, the tension broke. The man who walked in was not a VIP. He wore a rumpled suit, not a tailored one, but he carried himself with an arrogant, unearned authority. He had the unmistakable posture of a cop. It was Caleb. He walked directly to her station in the VIP section. Ignoring Grace's intercepting glance, he looked confident. He was smiling. That same proprietary smile that had always made her skin crawl. He truly believed he had the full force of a federal agency backing his play. He leaned across the bar, as if giving a complex drink order. "It's over, Avery," he whispered, his voice oozing a sick, triumphant righteousness. "My team is outside. They're ready to move. You are going to walk out of here with me. Right now, you're going to give a witness statement against Vega for everything he's done." Avery kept her hands perfectly still on the bar top. "I'm working. Caleb." His smile vanished. The control freak, the bully, surfaced. "Don't be stupid. You're in over your head. I'm your only way out. If you don't walk out with me right now, I will bring this entire place down. I have federal backup. They will tear this building apart to get to you." Upstairs, in the dark command center, Santino watched the high-definition footage. He heard every single, amplified word. His hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white. He saw the threat, the way Caleb's eyes raked over her. Rocco tensed, ready to move. "Boss," Santino held up a hand, his eyes locked on the screen. His breathing was slow, measured. If he sent his men now, he'd catch Caleb. But Caleb was just a pawn. The federal backup the rival crew would scatter. The trap would snap shut on a rat, and the wolves would escape. He had to let them think they were in control. He had to let Caleb make his move. "No," Santino said, his voice a low growl of pure, contained rage. "Let him go. Let him walk out of there. Put a shadow team on him. I don't want him. I want the nest. I want the people he reports to." He watched the screen as Caleb, frustrated, threw a $20 bill on the bar and stormed out, a final, dark look thrown over his shoulder at Avery. Santino had made the hard choice. He'd let the wolf leave, trusting his bait was still safe, for now. The plan imploded at precisely 2:07 in the morning, in the Safe House Command Center. Santino watched the feed from the Shadow Team's dash cam. The gray sedan, which had been driving in a predictable loop for an hour, suddenly accelerated, ran a red light, and made an illegal U-turn. "He's made the tail," Rocco said, his voice flat. The feed became a blur of swerving lights. "He's doubling back. He's going toward the bar." "He's not running," Santino said, a cold realization dawning. "He's hunting. Get a team to the alley, now." But Caleb was a cop. He knew tactics, and he knew response times. He was already there. Avery had just said goodnight to Grace. The adrenaline of the night had left her exhausted, her body thrumming with a low-vibration dread. She pushed open the heavy steel door to the rear staff alley, her mind on the warm bed at the guest house. He was just there, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the brick wall. "Police!" Caleb barked, his voice pure, authoritative, and utterly devoid of the man she once knew. Before she could scream, he was on her. It wasn't a struggle, it was an arrest. He grabbed her right arm, twisted it behind her back in a painful, practiced lock, and slammed her face first against the brick wall. Her head connected with a dull thud, making her vision swim. "You're coming with me, Avery," he hissed in her ear. "You're a material witness. Stop resisting." He was moving fast, zip-cuffing her wrists behind her back, dragging her toward the alley mouth. A black car, not his sedan, screeched to a halt. He threw her into the back seat, jumped in after her, and the car sped off, its tires smoking on the asphalt. Just as Santino's men rounded the far corner, she was gone. They drove in terrifying silence, Avery's heart hammering against her ribs, her cheeks stinging from the brick. He didn't take her to a police station. He took her to the water, to the desolate, windswept expanse of the Canton docks. He dragged her from the car and into a vast, dark warehouse that smelled of rust, dead fish, and mold. It was empty, save for 3 other men standing under a single, buzzing fluorescent light. They wore cheap nylon windbreakers with FMS embroidered on the breast and fake, shiny badges clipped to their belts. One of them was setting up a smartphone on a small tripod. "This is her," the man with the camera asked, his voice bored. "Took you long enough, Royce." "She was secured," Caleb said, shoving Avery forward into a metal folding chair. "She's stubborn." The leader stepped forward. He was older, with dead eyes. "Avery Lane. We are the Federal Maritime Integrity Service. We have reason to believe your employer, Santino Vega, is forcing you to launder money through his establishment. We're here to offer you a way out. Witness protection. All you have to do is make a statement. Right here," as he gestured to the camera, detailing his crimes. They wanted to blackmail the Vega group. They wanted to use her, his employee, to create leverage. Avery's mind raced, recalling Santino's words, his training. "Stall, use what you know." "You're not federal," she said. Her voice shook, but it was clear. The 3 men stopped. Caleb, who had been pacing, froze. "What did you say?" the leader asked, his fake friendly demeanor vanishing. "I said you're not federal," Avery repeated, lifting her chin. She was terrified, but the training had given her a sliver of anger to cling to. "Those badges, they don't have serial numbers, and the Federal Maritime Integrity Service doesn't exist. I know who you are. You're the Philadelphia crew." The silence in the warehouse was absolute. The leader stared at Caleb with pure venom. "You said she was a stupid, scared waitress." Caleb's face contorted. This was the ultimate betrayal of his narrative. He stormed over to Avery, grabbing her by the chin, forcing her to look at him. "You chose him," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "A piece of criminal trash over me. I'm a cop. I'm the good guy." "You're suspended," Avery shot back, the words from Santino's file hitting their mark. "For stalking, for abusing the database. You're not a cop. Caleb, you're just a criminal who hasn't been caught." The slap was so hard it snapped her head to the side, her ear ringing. "That was because of you," he roared, his self-control shattering completely. "You ruined me. You made me look for you. You made me break the rules. I was trying to fix my life. I'm bringing down a major kingpin. This was my chance to be a hero. And you sided with him." Back in the armored SUV, Santino's face was carved from ice. "We lost visual. The alley team missed him by less than 30 seconds. "We're blind, boss," Rocco said, his hands clenched on the wheel. "We're checking traffic cams, but he could be anywhere." Santino said nothing. He was already moving to his personal console, tapping a secure application. A map of the city filled the screen. After a moment, a single, blinking red dot appeared. Rocco stared. "Boss, her phone," Santino said, his voice a low, cold monotone. "At the guest house. During the training, I told her I was upgrading her burner for a more secure line. The new one has a micro-tracker. She was never going to be out of my sight." He had not told her. He had prepared for this, but he had not trusted her with that final detail. It was a breach of their new agreement, a seed of a new conflict, but it was the only thing keeping her alive. "Canton Docks," Santino said. "Warehouse 4B. He has her." He was already shrugging into his own tactical vest. "Mobilize the East Coast Division. Full assault loadout. I want a perimeter in 5 minutes. No one goes in until I'm there." He picked up his secure phone, dialing a number that wasn't on his regular contact list. "Vega," he snapped. "I'm at Canton, Warehouse 4B. I have a situation. A rival crew, posing as federal agents, has one of my people. I'm handling it, but I need a clean perimeter from the Urban Harbor Enforcement Unit. I expect noise. I want the official report to read as a jurisdictional dispute. Your men find nothing but the shell casings. We leave them. Am I clear?" He hung up. His legal cover was in place, in the warehouse. Caleb was unhinged. He was pacing, ranting at Avery about her ingratitude, his ruined career, his lost honor. The fake federal crew was trying to get him to focus, but he was lost in his own narcissistic rage. "He's sleeping with you, isn't he?" Caleb suddenly sneered. "That's it. You left a decent man for a mafia boss. You're just a—" He stopped. A truly stupid, arrogant idea bloomed in his mind. He wanted to prove a point. He wanted to show Santino Vega that she was still his. He pulled out his phone. "You think he's coming for you? You think you're special?" He grabbed Avery's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, hard enough to bruise. He shoved his face next to hers, grinning into the camera. Click! He sent the photo to the anonymous number his new partners had given him. The one they said was a back channel to the Vega group. Santino's phone buzzed in his hand. He was 5 blocks from the warehouse, the SUV rolling silent. He opened the message. It was Avery. Her eyes were wide, defiant, and terrified. Her wrists were bound, and it was Caleb's face, grinning, his hand crushing her arm, marking her. A possessive, cold, primal fury unlike anything he had ever known flooded his senses. It wasn't just jealousy. It was the tactical arrogance of the move. Caleb had just created evidence. That photo, in the wrong hands, would be a nightmare. It would prove Santino couldn't protect his own, or worse, that he was involved in kidnapping. This had to be clean. He keyed his team-wide comms. His voice was a low, terrifying growl. "We move. Now. 3 federal subjects are to be taken alive. Non-lethal takedown. I want to know who they work for." "And the cop boss?" Rocco asked from the driver's seat. Santino stared at the picture, at Caleb's hand on Avery's skin. "No one fires first. I go in first." He took his own sidearm from its holster. "Royce is mine." Inside the warehouse, Avery heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of heavy vehicles rolling to a stop on the gravel outside. The FMS crew heard it too, their eyes going wide with panic. They drew their pistols. Caleb, startled out of his rant, drew his... Avery held her breath, her heart hammering. The heavy thud of boots hit the ground outside the thin metal door. It was over. Either Caleb was about to be arrested, or a war was about to start. The heavy steel door didn't just open, it imploded. A single, percussive thump blew the lock mechanism clean out of the frame, and the door slammed inward, screeching on its metal hinges. Before the echo died, 3 small, black canisters rolled across the concrete floor, hissing violently. Thick, acrid smoke poured from them, instantly filling the vast, dark space. The single fluorescent light above became a useless, hazy smear. The FMIS agents shouted in panic, their voices muffled and confused, instantly blind. Avery's eyes burned, and she doubled over, coughing, her lungs seizing in the chemical fog. Through the swirling gray chaos, 3 figures emerged, moving low and fast, dark silhouettes against the open doorway. Santino was in the center, flanked by Rocco and 1 other guard. He wore no mask. His face was a mask itself, carved from cold fury, his eyes scanning the chaos. His pistol was held low, pointed at the floor, a position of lethal readiness, not panicked aggression. His gaze cut through the smog and found Caleb. "Royce!" His voice was not a shout. It was a cold, sharp command that sliced through the noise. "Let her go. You are standing on Vega Group territory." Caleb reacted like the cornered animal he was. He grabbed Avery, yanking her up from the chair by her bound arms, and spun her around, using her as a shield. He pressed the cold, round barrel of his service revolver to her temple. The metal felt like a circle of ice against her skin, a familiar, terrifying pressure. "Federal operation," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria, trying to project an authority he didn't have. "We are federal agents. You are interfering. You're all under arrest." Santino didn't even raise his pistol. He simply lifted his free hand, his smartphone held flat. He tapped the screen. A new voice filled the warehouse, tinny, amplified, and unmistakably official. The voice of the corrupt officer he had called earlier. "Vega, listen. I don't know who you're asking about, but there is no operation, federal or otherwise, at the Canton docks tonight. My unit's log is clear. You're on your own." Santino clicked off the recording. "That," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "was the Urban Harbor Enforcement Unit. Your backup isn't coming." Caleb's face, visible in the thinning smoke, went white. The bluff had been called. He was alone, a disgraced cop standing between 3 fake agents and an armed mafia crew. It was the moment of confusion Santino had anticipated. Caleb's focus was shattered. His grip on Avery's arm was agonizingly tight, but his stance was unsteady. "Don't pull. Use his weight." Santino's voice echoed in her head from the gym. Avery stopped resisting. She suddenly dropped all her weight, going limp, and then rammed her head backward, connecting solidly with the side of Caleb's jaw. His teeth clicked, and he roared in pained surprise. His grip faltered for a single, crucial second, in that split second. Avery didn't try to run. She did exactly what Santino had taught her. She fell, rolling hard onto the dirty concrete, tucking her shoulder and using the momentum to get clear of him, scrambling away from the line of fire. "Now!" Santino yelled. The 3 FMIS agents, realizing their federal cover was blown, raised their weapons. They opened fire first, their shots panicked and wild, bullets sparking high off the concrete pillars. The warehouse erupted in a deafening cacophony. Santino's 2 guards moved with brutal, practiced efficiency. They didn't spray. They fired in controlled, double taps, aiming low. Pop, 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 pop. One agent screamed, a high-pitched shriek, and collapsed, clutching a shattered knee. The leader went down, grabbing his thigh, his pistol clattering away. The 3rd man, seeing his partners neutralized, dropped his weapon and threw his hands high in the air. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Clinical. Exactly as Santino had ordered. He needed them alive. Caleb, however, was not a professional. He was pure, desperate ego. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the surrendered agents, his gun hand shaking. He saw Avery, who had rolled to a stop near Santino's position. All his rage, his humiliation, his failure. Focused on one target, he swung his pistol, not at Avery, but at Santino. "You," he roared, his voice cracking. "You stole her. She was mine." It was the raw, pathetic truth, the first and last time the two men would truly face each other. Santino's own weapon was already centered on Caleb's chest, his finger steady on the trigger. But he didn't fire. He saw Avery. Her eyes were wide, trapped in the nightmare, watching him, watching the gun. "Avery!" he commanded, his voice sharp but not unkind. "Look at me!" She tore her eyes from Caleb, her breath hitched in a sob, and locked them with his. In that instant, she was focused only on him, on his steady gaze, not on the man he was about to shoot. The moment her gaze was secure, Santino fired, a single, deafening shot. It was clean, precise. The bullet tore through Caleb's right shoulder, the force spinning him completely around. He collapsed in a heap, his pistol skittering across the floor. He lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of shock and agony. He was still rambling, the words mixing with pathetic sobs. "You'll regret this. Avery, you chose the Mafia over someone who did everything right." Santino walked forward, his steps measured, his face an unreadable mask of cold purpose. He raised his pistol again, his arm steady, pointed directly at Caleb's head. He was going to erase the problem, permanently. Avery, her hands still bound behind her, scrambled to her feet. "Santino!" she cried out. He stopped, but his arm remained steady. "Don't," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, not in front of me." His eyes met hers. The coldness was still there, an icy fire, but it was warring with something else. "Don't make me watch that," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. "Don't make me carry that image for the rest of my life, please." It was the ultimate test. He had given her his word. He had promised to be different. The seconds stretched, filled only with the sound of Caleb's whimpering and the moans of the wounded agents. Santino held her gaze for one long, agonizing moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate breath, he lowered his pistol. He had made his choice. He valued her request over his own need for a clean, permanent solution. He gave a sharp nod to Rocco. "Get him on his feet. Get them all. Take them to the water. We'll hand them over to the proper authorities." Rocco understood the euphemism. Caleb would disappear, but Avery would be spared the sight. It seemed over. The tension broke, leaving Avery shaking with relief. But just as Rocco moved to haul Caleb up, the FMIS leader with the shot-up thigh, who had been watching with hateful, pain-filled eyes, made his final move. "If we're not getting paid," he spat, "nobody is—" He fumbled inside his jacket, pulling out a small, metallic device. Before anyone could stop him, he pressed the button. A small thermite incendiary device in his hand ignited with a blinding, magnesium-white flash. He hurled it into a towering stack of dry, wooden pallets and shipping crates in the corner. The effect was instantaneous. The decades-old dry wood erupted, not in a slow burn, but in a violent explosion of flame. A wall of heat and fire rushed toward them, sucking the air from the room. The ancient warehouse was a tinderbox. They were trapped, with 3 wounded, uncooperative prisoners, and the only way out was through a rapidly growing wall of fire. The climax was not over. It had just changed. The fire caught the old, dry wood with an explosive whoosh. The thermite charge had done its job, and the stack of pallets erupted in a column of white-hot flame that licked the steel rafters 30 feet above. A wave of heat, dry and suffocating, rolled over them. "This way," Rocco yelled, already dragging the surrendered agent with the shot-up leg, moving toward the main roll-up door, but the fire, fed by a breeze from the broken door, moved faster. It leaped from the pallets to a stack of cardboard shipping containers, and in seconds, the main exit was a roaring, impenetrable curtain of orange. "Back, back," Santino roared. One of his guards, Marco, was hit in the leg by a piece of falling, burning debris. He crumpled to the ground. They were trapped. Santino, Avery, and the wounded Marco, cut off from the main force by a wall of fire. "The side window," Santino yelled, spotting a high, grimy ventilation window near the back wall. He grabbed Avery's arm. "You're first. Marco, cover us." He dragged her to the wall, kicking aside debris. He cupped his hands. "Climb on my shoulders. Break the glass and get out." Avery stared at him, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wide with terror, but not panic. She coughed, the smoke clawing at her lungs. She looked at the fire, now eating the roof beams, then at him, the man who had just saved her, the man who had also tracked her. "No," she said, her voice a raw rasp. "Avery, this is not a discussion. Climb," he commanded, trying to lift her. She shoved his hands away, planting her feet. "I'm not leaving you," she yelled over the roar of the flames. "I'm done running. If you stay, I stay." His eyes locked on hers, a look of stunned, raw disbelief. Before he could argue, the world outside the warehouse exploded in blue and red flashing lights. The massive side-loading bay door, the one they had assumed was rusted shut, suddenly screeched and rolled upward, flooding the warehouse with blinding floodlights and the silhouettes of armed men. But their vests didn't read FBI or BPD. They read UHEU. It was Santino's contact, the corrupt harbor enforcement unit. They had been forced to respond to the flames and gunfire, to show up and maintain their cover of ignorance. The UHEU commander, the man whose voice Santino had recorded, stormed in, his gun drawn. What the hell is going on here? Santino realized the gift he'd been given. The legal knot had just been untied. This was no longer a mafia firefight. It was now an official, if chaotic, operation. Rocco and his team, having found another exit, emerged from the smoke, dragging the prisoners. Caleb, his face white with pain, his shoulders soaked in blood, was shoved out first. When he saw the UHEU uniforms, a surge of desperate, manic hope filled his eyes. "Officers!" he screamed, stumbling toward the commander. "Thank God, arrest these men. Arrest Vega, I'm Officer Royce. Savannah PD, I was conducting a federal operation. These men are mafia. They ambushed us." The UHEU commander looked at Caleb's bleeding shoulder, at the fake agents, at Santino, who was now helping his wounded man. He then looked down at the shiny, cheap FMS badge still clipped to Caleb's belt. "This is you?" the commander asked, tapping the fake badge. "Yes," Caleb said, breathing heavily. "I'm the arresting officer." The commander didn't hesitate. He grabbed Caleb's good arm, spun him around, and slammed him against a container. "You're under arrest," he barked, cuffing him. "What?" Caleb shrieked, his mind shattering. "No, I'm the cop. I'm the good guy I called you." "You're not federal, son," the commander sneered, recognizing the fake. "You're in our jurisdiction impersonating an officer, and you're at the scene of an assault. You just made this real easy for us. Get him out of here." Caleb Royce, the man who had tried to play both sides, was undone by the very system he had tried to corrupt. He was dragged out, screaming Avery's name, not as a mafia target, but as a common criminal. Avery and Santino emerged last. Avery was coughing violently, her lungs burning, her legs giving out. As they cleared the smoke, Santino didn't let her fall. He scooped her up into his arms, pulling her tightly against his chest. He walked right past the UHEU commander, right past the flashing lights and the shouting men, holding her. It was a public, non-negotiable statement, a silent claiming in front of the very law he subverted. She was his. She was protected, back at the Fleet Street guest house. The silence was deafening. They had both showered, washing away the soot and blood, but the adrenaline still hummed. Avery stood in the middle of the room in a clean robe, watching Santino pour 2 glasses of whiskey. "The tracker," she said, her voice quiet. He stopped, his back to her. He didn't pretend. "You said we would decide together," she said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a new, cold anger. "You put a chip on me." He turned, his face hard with exhaustion. "Yes, I need you to be strong. Santino," she said, stepping toward him. "I need what you did tonight, but I also need you to be honest. I can't trade one man who lies for another. I won't." He set the glass down. "I will always do too much to keep you safe," he said, his voice a low, rough vow. I will always overreact. It's who I am. I won't apologize for using every tool I have to keep you alive. Her heart sank. He was just like him. But, he continued, holding her gaze, you are right. I broke my word to you. And he took a step closer, his eyes intense. So from now on, I will tell you first. I will tell you the plan. All of it. Even the parts you will hate. You will listen. And then we will decide. Together. That is my promise. He was giving the power back to her. He was admitting a flaw and offering a new contract, one built on his strength, but guided by her choice. Avery looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw the man who had shot Caleb and the man who had lowered his gun at her request. Caleb had used violence to control. Santino had used it to protect. And then, he had learned to control it, for her. She realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that she hadn't fallen from one cage into another. She was standing in a fortress, and for the first time in her life, she had been handed the key. Weeks later, the Meridian reopened, its dark facade gleaming. The local news had run a short piece on the unfortunate electrical fire at the Canton docks, and the UHEU had confirmed that a multi-state impersonation ring had been successfully neutralized. The Vega Group and its flagship restaurant were never mentioned. Avery was back, but not in her server's uniform. She wore a tailored black dress and a small, discreet earpiece. She was the new floor manager. She moved with a confidence that turned heads, an authority that was quiet, earned, and absolute. Santino trusted her. She had seen the very worst of his world, and she had not run. That night, after the last customer had left, she found him waiting on the top floor, in the safe house. The wall of monitors was off. It was just an apartment, overlooking the calm, glittering harbor. He didn't speak. He just held out a small, black, velvet box. She opened it. Inside, there was no massive diamond. There was a simple, heavy, platinum band, modern and elegant. And next to it, a sleek, black key card. I can't promise that I'll always be clean, Avery, he said, his voice rough, brutally honest. This world, my world, it's not. But I promise I will always come to you before I get in the mud. I promise that you will always have the choice. He looked at the box, then at her. Stay, not in the guest house. Here, with me. Be my partner. Avery looked at the ring, then at the keycard. She picked up the keycard, her fingers closing around the cool, heavy plastic, a symbol of choice, not a chain. She slid it into the pocket of her dress. Then, she stepped forward, slid her hands around his neck, and pulled his mouth down to hers. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss from before. It was slow and deep and warm. It was the kiss of a woman who was not running, but had finally, against all odds, arrived home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.